this is the experiment number 1. The object of this experiment is to study EEG waveform in unipolar recording mode. This is the electroencephalograph simulator which will be employed in order to perform the experiment. Looking into the panel, so it comprises of the scalp electrodes shown on the left side, and on the right side is the processing blocks. So the signals will be picked from the electrodes on the scalp and will be sent through the probe to the pre-amplifier, where the signal will be amplified first and will be in the next step the filtering will take place, followed by the main amplifier, where the signals would be increased in amplitude, and this main amplifier is controlled by a gain adjustment. So if we further look into the electrodes of the scalp, the simulated scalp, then it comprises of the channels which are placed at the standard electrode placement of 10-20. So this figure shows the left hemisphere of this scalp, written by L here. So the left portion of this scalp is the left hemisphere, and which is capable of controlling the right body parts, and then on the right hemisphere is written by an R. So the electrodes which are present in the left hemisphere of the scalp will be measured with respect to the reference A1. So this is the reference electrode, and likewise we have another reference electrode A2 on right side. So whenever we perform unipolar recording, we will be taking electrode potentials on the scalp. For left electrodes present on the left hemisphere of the scalp, the potential will be measured with respect to A1, and for those electrodes which are present on the right hemisphere, the potential will be measured with respect to A2. Now if we look into the processing blocks which are present in this simulator, so from those scalp electrodes, the probe will be connected to this particular block, and since we have 3 terminals here, positive, negative and reference, corresponding to the probe input, so we'll be having red, blue and black probe colored inputs, where we'll be having red corresponding to the electrode and blue corresponding to the reference. And the signals will be fed to the pre-amplifier, then followed by filter and the main amplifier. This is the digital storage oscilloscope which we will be using in the experiment in order to acquire the data from the simulator. And if you look into this oscilloscope, so they are basic control knobs and buttons. So in fact this particular knob is the volt per division knob, and for using this knob we will be changing the vertical axis, the unit corresponding to the vertical axis, which is volts, and using the second knob, this one, will be changing the time. So in fact if we are going to increase the scale using the first knob, the volt per division, then we will observe that the amplitude of the waveform which is being acquired will increase. And likewise if we are going to change the knob setting, the second knob, then in that case we are going to change the time per division, the seconds per division. In fact we'll observe that when we change the orientation of the second knob, then there will be a sort of dilation that would take place in the waveforms. Then since this particular DSO is capable of measuring 2 channels at a time, and since the simulator is we are going to use simulator with only one the probes, and that is why only one channel will be required. So in fact this DSO is capable of measuring 2 waveforms using CH1 and CH2, 2 channels, but we will be using only channel 1. So shown over here is the scalp from the simulator, and we shall be connecting the electrodes from the points which are going to give us the waveform on DSO. for example F7 and A1. So A1 and A2, which are the reference electrodes, will always be taken as common, and we'll be observing the potential of the electrodes on a scalp with respect to these reference electrodes. So A1 and A2 are the reference electrode. So we'll first observe the value of F7 with respect to A1. So this is F7. So waveform for F7 looks something with respect to A1 looks something like this. Then we have the waveform of F8 with respect to A2, which is indicated by flashes. Then we have the potential of electrode T3 with respect to A1, T4 with respect to A2, T5 with respect to A1, T6 with respect to A2, then O1 with respect to A1, and O2 with respect to A2. So the waveforms that are shown on the top right side are the waveforms which are taken from the sheet, the experiment sheet, and we'll in fact be trying to plot these waveforms on the DSO using the simulator. So in order to perform the connections using the probes, we'll connect the red end of the probe to the scalp terminals like F7, F8, T3, T4, T5, T6, O1 and O2, while the blue end will be connected to the reference electrodes A1 and A2. So here is the experiment that had been performed. So we had connected the probes to the scalp and then to the processing units, and the waveforms had been recorded on the DSO. And now we'll observe one by one the waveforms that were recorded on DSO, and we'll plot those. We'll try to take out those waveforms on one side. So this corresponds to the first F7A1 unipolar arrangement. Now we have the second F8A2 waveform being observed on the DSO. Now we are plotting the third one, which corresponds to the T3A1 potentials. Likewise, we will be obtaining T4A2. So this is the fifth waveform. T5A1, and now on the screen we are plotting the next waveform T6A2. Then with respect to O1, so this is the potential corresponding to O1A1, and now the final waveform which corresponds to O2A2 is being plotted. So if we compare these waveforms with the waveforms that are given on the simulator, so in fact the waveforms which are given on simulator are more dilated. So the in order to obtain the waveforms on the DSO which exactly resembles the waveform on the drawn on the simulator, so we'll have to increase the knob setting for seconds per division, so that we could have lesser dilations. Now the following questions are to be reported, one of which is to how the delta waves are identified and interpreted. The second is how the theta wave are identified and interpreted. The third is how unipolar recording is done.